The wine was still warm when it soaked through my dress, and the laughter that followed was colder than any winter I had ever known. But what the Duke's son did not know, what none of them knew as they watched me standing there in my ruined uniform, was that I held in my possession the very document that could bring their entire gilded world crashing down around them. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is the story of how I went from heiress to servant, from humiliated to powerful, and from hatred to something I never expected to feel for the man who poured wine upon me as though I were nothing more than a stain upon his polished floor. I must begin at the beginning, for no story of ruin and redemption makes sense without understanding what was lost. I was born in the year of our Lord, 1832, the only daughter of Charles Whitmore, a merchant whose ships sailed to every corner of the known world. We were not aristocracy, no, but we were wealthy beyond measure, and my father moved in circles that would have been closed to a man of trade only a generation before. Money, you see, has a way of opening doors that birth alone cannot. Our home in Bristol was grand, filled with silks from the Orient, porcelain from China, and paintings my father had commissioned from artists whose names were spoken with reverence in London's finest salons. I was educated as though I were a duke's daughter myself, with tutors in French, Italian, music, and literature. My father believed that knowledge was the greatest inheritance he could give me, and he was determined that I should want for nothing, neither material nor intellectual. I remember the day my father first mentioned the Duke of Ashford. I was 17, sitting in the morning room with my embroidery, and he came in with a letter in his hand, his face bright with excitement. The Duke, he told me, had approached him about a business venture, an investment in shipping routes to the Americas that promised returns beyond anything my father had yet achieved. The Duke needed capital, and my father had it in abundance. Together, they would build an empire of trade. I asked my father if he trusted the Duke, for I had heard whispers even then about the Ashford family. They were old nobility, their title stretching back centuries, but their fortune had dwindled through generations of excess and poor management. The current Duke, Edward Ashford, was known for his coldness, his imperious manner, and his absolute conviction that those of noble birth were inherently superior to those who had earned their wealth through labor and enterprise. My father laughed at my concern. He told me that business was business, and that the Duke's signature on a promissory note was as good as gold. He had secured a guarantee of £50,000, a sum that would be repaid with interest once the shipping venture proved successful. The document was signed, witnessed, and locked away in my father's study, a testament to the partnership between old nobility and new money. For 2 years, the venture seemed to flourish. Ships sailed, goods were traded, and profits accumulated. My father spoke of the Duke with something approaching admiration, for the man had connections that opened markets my father could never have accessed alone. I was introduced to the Ashford family at a ball in London, and I remember the Duchess looking at me as though I were something unpleasant she had discovered on the sole of her shoe. Their son, Sebastian, was 19 then, a young man of striking appearance, but with eyes that held no warmth. He barely acknowledged my existence, turning away to speak with a young lady of proper breeding as though I had not been presented to him at all. I should have known then what they truly thought of us, but I was young, and I believed in my father's judgment, and I trusted that the bonds of business would hold firm against the prejudices of class. The collapse came suddenly, as such things often do. A ship was lost at sea, then another, then a third. The insurance did not cover the losses, for there were clauses my father had not fully understood, clauses that the Duke's solicitors had inserted with careful precision. Within 6 months, my father had lost nearly everything he had invested in the venture. He went to the Duke, promissory note in hand, asking for the £50,000 he was owed, the guarantee that would allow him to rebuild. The Duke refused. He claimed the note was void, that the terms had not been met, that my father had failed to uphold his end of the agreement. His solicitors produced documents, counter-arguments, and legal threats that would have cost my father more to fight than the debt itself was worth. The Duke knew this, of course. He had planned it from the beginning. He had used my father's capital, extracted every ounce of value from it, and then discarded him like a broken tool. My father fought as long as he could, but the stress and the shame were too much for his heart to bear. He died in the spring of 1853, 6 months after the Duke's betrayal, leaving me alone in a world that had no place for a merchant's daughter without a fortune to recommend her. Our home was sold to pay the remaining debts. The silks, the porcelain, the paintings, all of it went to creditors who circled like vultures over my father's corpse. I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back, a few pieces of my mother's jewelry, and one document that I had saved from the wreckage. The promissory note. I had found it in my father's study the night before the solicitors came to take inventory. Something told me to hide it, to keep it safe, to trust no one with its existence. I sewed it into the lining of my traveling case, and there it remained through all the years that followed, a secret I carried with me like a coal against my heart. For 2 years, I survived as best I could. I worked as a governess for a family in Hampshire, teaching their daughters French and music while enduring the casual cruelties of their mother, who never let me forget that I was a servant now, no matter what I had been before. When that position ended, I found another, and then another, each one a little more degrading than the last, each one a reminder of how far I had fallen. It was in the autumn of 1855 that I saw the advertisement in the London paper. Ashford Manor was seeking a parlour maid, someone with education and refinement to serve in the household of the Duke. The irony was not lost on me. The very family that had destroyed my father was now offering me employment, unaware that the merchant's daughter they had ruined still walked the earth. I should have turned away. I should have sought work anywhere else, in any other household, far from the people who had caused me such pain. But something drew me to that advertisement, something I could not name. Perhaps it was the desire to see them again, to look upon their faces and know that I had survived what they had done. Perhaps it was the hope that I might find some way to use the document I had hidden away, some opportunity to claim what was rightfully mine. Or perhaps it was simply fate, that invisible hand that guides us toward our destinies whether we wish to go or not. I applied for the position under my mother's maiden name, calling myself Eleanor Winters. My references were adequate, my manner was humble, and my education, which I downplayed but could not entirely hide, was seen as an asset for a household that prided itself on refinement. I was hired without ever meeting the Duke or Duchess, interviewed only by the housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, a stern woman with steel-gray hair who assessed me with eyes that missed nothing. My first day at Ashford Manor, I walked through the servants' entrance and felt the weight of the house pressing down upon me. It was a magnificent structure, built of pale stone that glowed golden in the autumn light, with towers and turrets that spoke of centuries of wealth and power. The grounds stretched for miles in every direction, manicured gardens giving way to wild forests and rolling hills. Inside, the halls were lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors, their painted eyes following me as I walked, as though they knew I did not belong. I was assigned to the parlor, responsible for keeping the receiving rooms immaculate, polishing silver, arranging flowers, and attending to the family's needs during social gatherings. It was demanding work, but I was grateful for it kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. I learned the rhythms of the household, the hierarchy among the servants, and the particular preferences of each member of the family. The Duke I saw rarely, for he spent most of his time in London, attending to business and politics. When he was in residence, he moved through the house like a ghost, his presence felt but seldom seen. The Duchess was another matter entirely. She was everywhere, her sharp voice echoing through the halls as she criticized the servants, rearranged the furniture, and fretted over the social standing of the family. She was a beautiful woman still, with the kind of cold, porcelain features that never seemed to age, but there was a cruelty in her that she did not bother to hide. The servants feared her, and I quickly learned to stay out of her way. And then there was Sebastian. Lord Sebastian Ashford had grown in the 3 years since I had last seen him. At 21, he was no longer a boy but a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of a winter storm. He was handsome in the way that a blade is handsome, all sharp edges and dangerous beauty. The maids whispered about him, giggling over his looks and his fortune, but I saw what they did not. I saw the arrogance in the set of his jaw, the contempt in the way he looked at those he considered beneath him, the casual cruelty that came as naturally to him as breathing. He did not recognize me, of course. Why would he? I had been a merchant's daughter in a fine gown the last time we met, and now I was a servant in a plain uniform, my hair pinned beneath a cap, my eyes cast downward as I had been taught. I was invisible to him, as all servants were invisible, nothing more than a function, a pair of hands to polish his silverware and pour his wine. For 6 months, I kept my head down and did my work. I saved my wages, hiding them away with the promissory note, planning for the day when I would have enough to leave service and start again somewhere far from Ashford Manor. I told myself that I wanted nothing to do with the family, that I sought no revenge, that I was content to simply survive. But fate had other plans. The night of the winter ball, I understood that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. It was the grandest event of the season, a celebration of the Duke's birthday that drew aristocrats from across the county. The house was transformed into a wonderland of candlelight and flowers, with musicians playing in the gallery and champagne flowing like water. I was assigned to the main hall, tasked with carrying trays of refreshments and attending to the needs of the guests. I had been working for hours when it happened. My feet ached, my arms trembled from the weight of the silver trays, and my starched uniform had grown damp with perspiration. I was crossing the ballroom with a tray of wine glasses when I saw him. Sebastian stood in a circle of young aristocrats, laughing at something one of them had said. He was dressed impeccably, his tailcoat perfectly fitted, his cravat tied in an elaborate knot that must have taken his valet an hour to achieve. He looked like everything I had lost, everything that had been taken from me, and for a moment I forgot myself. I forgot that I was a servant now, that I was invisible, that I was nothing. I stumbled. It was the smallest misstep, a slight catch of my heel on the polished floor, but it was enough. The tray tilted, and a single glass of red wine slid from its surface, spilling across the hem of a young lady's gown. The music did not stop, but it seemed to. The chatter did not cease, but it faded into silence in my ears. The young lady shrieked, looking down at her ruined dress with an expression of horror. Sebastian turned to see what had caused the commotion, and his eyes fell upon me. I expected anger. I expected to be dismissed on the spot. What I did not expect was the smile that spread across his face, a slow, cruel smile that made my blood run cold. He took a glass of wine from the tray of a nearby footman and walked toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, as he stopped before me and raised the glass. Then, with deliberate precision, he poured the wine over my head. The gasps from the crowd were audible this time. The red liquid soaked through my cap, ran down my face, and dripped onto my uniform, staining it the color of blood. I could feel it seeping into my hair, my skin, my very soul. Sebastian laughed. It was a sound I will never forget, a rich, careless laugh that was echoed by those around him, including his parents, who had come to see what was happening. The Duke raised an eyebrow, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. The Duchess laughed openly, her voice like the tinkling of broken glass. "What a clumsy creature," she said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Really, Sebastian, you should not waste good wine on such trash." The room erupted in laughter. I stood there, dripping, humiliated, feeling every eye upon me like a physical weight. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the ground and never be seen again. But I did not run. I lifted my chin. I looked at Sebastian, at his parents, at the crowd of aristocrats who thought they could treat me like dirt beneath their feet, and I felt something shift inside me. The shame did not disappear, but it was joined by something else, something stronger. Anger. I had been silent for too long. I had hidden for too long. I had allowed them to believe they had won, that they had destroyed my father and suffered no consequences, that they could treat me as they wished because I was powerless. They were wrong. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could consider the consequences, before I could remind myself that I was a servant who should know her place. I wonder, I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a blade, if your grace would find it so amusing if I were to call in the 50,000 pounds your family owes mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Sebastian's smile faded. The Duke's eyebrow lowered. The Duchess's laughter died in her throat. I reached into the pocket of my apron, where I had kept the document ever since I began working at the manor, as though some part of me had always known this moment would come. I had made a copy and hidden the original in a safe place, but this copy was notarized, legally binding, and unmistakably authentic. I held it up for all to see. This, I said, is a promissory note signed by Edward Ashford, Duke of Ashford, promising to repay 50,000 pounds to Charles Whitmore, my father, upon demand. The debt has never been paid. The interest has accrued for 3 years. By my calculations, your grace owes my family over 60,000 pounds. The Duke's face went white. I watched as the color drained from his cheeks, as the arrogance that had defined his every expression crumbled into something I had never seen there before. Fear. You cannot possibly expect me to believe, the Duke began, but his voice wavered, and everyone heard it. I expect nothing, your grace, I replied, except what is owed. My solicitors in London have been made aware of this document. They are prepared to pursue the matter in court if necessary. I am told that such cases, involving titled gentlemen and broken promises, are of great interest to the newspapers. The murmurs began then, rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. I saw faces I recognized, lords and ladies who had witnessed my humiliation, now staring at me with expressions of shock and, in some cases, barely concealed delight. The aristocracy loved nothing more than a scandal, and I had just handed them one. The Duke stepped forward, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am Eleanor Whitmore," I said, "daughter of Charles Whitmore, the man you destroyed. I am the woman your son just covered in wine while you laughed. And I am the one who will decide whether your family is ruined or saved." I turned and walked away, leaving a trail of wine-red droplets on the polished floor behind me. The ball ended early that night. I heard later that the Duke and Duchess retired to their chambers immediately after my departure, and that the guests departed in a flurry of whispered speculation. I had gone to the servants' quarters, changed out of my ruined uniform, and waited for what I knew would come. It came just before midnight. A footman appeared at my door, his face pale with barely suppressed excitement. The Duke wished to see me in his study, immediately. I followed the footman through the dark halls of the manor, past the portraits of ancestors who seemed to glare at me with renewed intensity. The Duke's study was a grand room lined with books and filled with the smell of leather and tobacco. He sat behind his desk, the Duchess standing rigid beside him, and Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his face unreadable. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore," the Duke said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I prefer to stand," I replied. The Duchess's lips thinned, but she said nothing. The Duke studied me for a long moment, his cold eyes assessing, calculating. "You have made quite an impression tonight," he said at last. "I have simply told the truth," I replied. "Something that seems to be in short supply in this household." Sebastian made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. The Duchess shot him a venomous glare. "The document you hold," the Duke continued, ignoring the exchange. "You claim it is authentic. I do not claim, Your Grace. It is. You signed it yourself. Your own solicitor witnessed it. The paper bears your family's seal. There is no question of its authenticity." The Duke's jaw tightened. I could see him struggling to maintain his composure, to project the cold authority that had always defined him. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want what is owed," I said simply. £50,000 plus 3 years of interest. Paid in full. The Duchess let out a harsh laugh. £60,000, she said. "Do you have any idea what that sum would mean for this family?" "I have some idea," I replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It would mean approximately what my family lost when your husband refused to honor his debt. It would mean the kind of ruin my father experienced before his heart gave out from the strain. It would mean losing your home, your possessions, your standing in society." "Yes, Your Grace, I have some idea." The Duchess's face flushed with anger, but before she could speak, Sebastian stepped forward. "Mother, father," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "May I speak with Miss Whitmore alone?" Both parents turned to stare at him with matching expressions of disbelief. "Absolutely not," the Duchess said. "This creature has come to destroy us. And you wish to speak with her alone?" "I wish to understand her," Sebastian replied. "And I believe I may be able to help resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone." The Duke studied his son for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "10 minutes," he said. "We will be in the drawing room." The Duke and Duchess departed, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. Sebastian and I were left alone, the fire crackling between us, the weight of everything unspoken filling the air. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the flames. I remained standing in the center of the room, my chin raised, my heart pounding. "I owe you an apology," he said at last. I was so surprised that I forgot to guard my expression. An apology? He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had not expected. Not the arrogance, not the contempt, but something that looked almost like shame. "What I did tonight," he said, "pouring wine on you, laughing, it was cruel. It was beneath me. And I am sorry." I did not know what to say. Of all the things I had anticipated from this meeting, an apology was not among them. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Because I could," he said. "Because you were a servant, and I was the son of a duke, and I have been taught since birth that people like you exist to serve people like me. Because I saw you stumble, and something in me wanted to see you fall further." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "And because," he continued, "for just a moment, when you walked into that ballroom, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And that frightened me." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" He laughed, but it was a different sound from the cruel laughter of earlier. This was bitter, self-mocking. "I know," he said. "It makes no sense. I saw you, a servant in a plain uniform, and I could not look away. And then you stumbled, and the spell was broken, and I remembered who I was supposed to be. So I punished you for making me feel something I was not supposed to feel." I did not know how to respond. Part of me wanted to reject his words, to dismiss them as manipulation, as another form of cruelty. But there was something in his voice, something in his eyes that made me hesitate. "And now?" I asked. "Now that you know who I am? Now that you know what your family did to mine?" Sebastian was silent for a moment. Then he crossed the room and stood before me, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "Now," he said, "I understand why you looked at me with such hatred, and I understand that you have every right to destroy us. But you wish me to spare you," I said. "That is why you asked to speak with me alone." you hope to charm me into forgiveness." "No," he said. "I asked to speak with you alone because I wanted you to know that not everyone in this family is the same. My father is a cold, calculating man who would sell his own mother if it served his interests. My mother is a creature of society, concerned only with appearances and status, but I am not them. Or at least, I do not wish to be." He took a breath. "I am not asking you to forgive," he continued. "I am not asking you to forget. I am only asking you to give me a chance to prove that I am capable of being better." I studied his face, searching for signs of deception, of manipulation. I had learned to be wary, to trust no one, to assume that every kindness concealed a blade. But I found nothing in his expression but sincerity, and something that might have been hope. "What would you have me do?" I asked. "Give us time," he said. 1 month. Do not go to the newspapers. Do not pursue the matter in court. Allow me to find a way to pay the debt without destroying the family." "And in return?" "In return," he said, "I will ensure that you are treated with the respect you deserve. You will no longer be a servant in this house. You will be a guest, housed in proper quarters, dressed as befits a lady of your standing. And I will personally work to find a solution that satisfies your claim." I considered his offer. It was more than I had expected, more than I had dared to hope, but trust did not come easily to me anymore. "How do I know you will keep your word?" I asked. Sebastian reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring, a heavy gold signet bearing the Ashford crest. "This has been in my family for 300 years, he said. "It is worth more than money. It is worth honor. I give it to you as a pledge. If I fail to keep my word, you may do with it as you wish." He placed the ring in my palm. It was warm from his body, heavy with the weight of centuries. 1 month, I said. 1 month, he agreed. The month that followed was unlike anything I had experienced. True to his word, Sebastian arranged for me to be moved from the servants' quarters to a guest room in the East Wing. The Duchess was furious, but the Duke, ever practical, recognized the necessity of keeping me appeased. I was provided with gowns appropriate to my new station, and I was introduced to the household as a distant relation visiting from the country. The servants whispered, "Of course." They had seen my humiliation at the ball, and now they saw me transformed into a lady. Some were resentful, believing I had somehow schemed my way into fortune. Others were sympathetic, recognizing a fellow sufferer of the aristocracy's casual cruelties. I did my best to treat them all with kindness, remembering what it felt like to be on the other side. Sebastian visited me daily. At first, our conversations were stiff and formal, limited to discussions of the debt and possible solutions. He explained the family's financial situation, which was more precarious than I had realized. The Ashfords had been living beyond their means for generations, maintaining the appearance of wealth while the substance dwindled. The £50,000 they owed my father was only part of a larger web of debts and obligations that threatened to bring the entire house down. I should have felt satisfaction at this revelation. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. As the days passed, our conversations grew longer and more personal. Sebastian told me about his childhood, the expectations that had been placed upon him, the loneliness of being raised to believe that emotion was weakness and compassion was foolishness. He told me about the friends he had lost, pushed away by his arrogance and cruelty, and the emptiness that had taken their place. I found myself telling him about my own past, about the happy years before my father's ruin, about the love that had filled our home, about the dreams I had once had for my future. I told him about the dark years that followed, the humiliations I had endured, the moments when I had wanted nothing more than to give up. We were two people who had been shaped by our circumstances, bent by the weight of expectation and loss, and in recognizing each other's pain, we began to see each other as something more than enemies. It happened gradually, so gradually that I did not notice it at first. A lingering glance across the dinner table, a touch that lasted a moment longer than necessary, a smile that softened his features and made him look almost gentle. I was falling in love with Sebastian Ashford. The realization terrified me. This was the man who had poured wine on my head, who had laughed at my humiliation, whose family had destroyed everything I held dear. How could I love him? How could I betray my father's memory so completely? But the heart does not listen to reason. It does not care about the past or the future. It knows only what it feels in the present moment, and what I felt when I was with Sebastian was a warmth I had not known in years. On the 20th day of the month, Sebastian came to me with a proposal. "I have found a way to pay the debt," he said. His face was pale, his expression troubled. "But it will require a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked. He took a breath. "My father has arranged a marriage for me," he said. "Lady Catherine Pemberton. Her family is wealthy, and her dowry would be more than sufficient to cover what we owe you, with enough left over to stabilize the family's finances." I felt as though I had been struck. A marriage, of course. It was the oldest solution in the aristocratic playbook, the trading of titles for money, of blood for gold. "I see," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "And when is this wedding to take place?" "The contracts are being drawn up now," Sebastian said. "The ceremony would be in the spring." I nodded slowly, fighting to keep my expression composed. "Then our business is concluded," I said. "You will have your money, and I will have my debt repaid. There is nothing more to discuss." "Eleanor," he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Miss Whitmore," I corrected. "We are not intimates, Lord Sebastian. We never were." The hurt in his eyes was unmistakable, but I hardened my heart against it. What had I expected? That he would choose me over his family's salvation? That love, barely acknowledged, could overcome centuries of tradition and expectation? I was a fool to have hoped. That night, I packed my belongings and prepared to leave Ashford Manor. I had what I wanted. The debt would be paid. My father's honor would be restored. I could start again, somewhere far from here, somewhere I would never have to see Sebastian Ashford's face again. But as I was closing my traveling case, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Sebastian standing in the hallway, his hair disheveled, his cravat undone, his eyes wild with an emotion I could not name. "I cannot do it," he said. "Do what?" "Marry her," he said. "I cannot marry Lady Catherine. I cannot spend my life with a woman I do not love while the woman I do love walks away." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Eleanor." He stepped into the room, taking my hands in his. "I am saying that the past month has shown me what my life could be, what I could be, with you beside me. I am saying that I would rather lose everything than lose you." "You cannot mean that," I whispered. "I have never meant anything more." He pulled me close, and his lips met mine in a kiss that erased every doubt, every fear, every rational argument that had been building in my mind. In that moment, there was only him, only me, only the impossible, undeniable truth of what we felt. When we finally parted, I was trembling. "What will we do?" I asked. "Your family, the debt, everything." "We will find a way," he said, "together." The weeks that followed were tumultuous. Sebastian broke off his engagement to Lady Catherine, causing a scandal that rippled through society. The Duchess raged, the Duke threatened, but Sebastian would not be moved. He had made his choice, and he would not be swayed. I insisted that the debt be addressed honestly. I did not want to begin my new life built on financial ruin. Sebastian and I worked together to find a solution, examining every option, every asset, every possibility. In the end, it was the Duke himself who provided the answer. Edward Ashford had spent his life accumulating properties, artwork, and investments, hoarding wealth while his family struggled to maintain appearances. When faced with the prospect of public disgrace, He finally agreed to liquidate some of his holdings. A country estate was sold, along with several valuable paintings and a collection of antiquities. The sum was enough to cover the debt with interest and to provide a modest foundation for the future. The payment was made in full, deposited into an account in my name, witnessed by solicitors, and documented with meticulous care. My father's honor was restored. The wrong that had been done to him was finally, after so many years, made right. But I did not keep the money. Instead, I used it to establish a trust, a fund that would provide education and opportunity for young women of limited means. I called it the Whitmore Foundation, in honor of my father, and I vowed that it would help others the way I wished someone had helped me in my darkest hours. Sebastian and I were married in the spring, in a small ceremony attended by only a handful of guests. The Duchess refused to attend, but the Duke was there, his face unreadable as he watched his son pledge his life to a merchant's daughter. I wore a gown of simple white silk, and I carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Sebastian had picked himself from the fields beyond the manor. It was not the grand wedding I might have dreamed of as a girl, but it was perfect. The years that followed were not easy. Society did not readily accept me, and there were many who whispered that I had schemed my way into the Ashford family. The Duchess remained cold, never quite forgiving me for stealing her son. The Duke grew more distant, retreating into his study and his solitude. But Sebastian and I built a life together, a life filled with love and purpose. We traveled, we read, we talked for hours about everything and nothing. He became a different man, kinder and more thoughtful. The cruelty of his youth burned away by the fire of our shared experiences. And I became a different woman, no longer defined by my past, no longer bound by my pain. There were challenges, of course. There were moments of doubt and difficulty. But whenever I felt the weight of the world pressing down upon me, I would look at Sebastian and remember the night he stood in my doorway, wild-eyed and desperate, telling me that he would rather lose everything than lose me. And I knew that whatever came, we would face it together. It is strange, looking back now, how the worst moment of my life became the beginning of the best. That night at the ball, when wine soaked through my dress and laughter rang in my ears, I thought I had lost everything. I thought I was broken beyond repair. But I was wrong. I was not broken. I was being forged, shaped by fire and pain into something stronger than I had ever been before. The humiliation I suffered was not my end. It was my beginning. If I could go back and speak to that girl, standing in her wine-stained uniform, I would tell her to hold on. I would tell her that her pain is not permanent, that her circumstances do not define her worth, that the people who look down on her now will one day look up to her in wonder. I would tell her that love is possible, even in the darkest places, that redemption is possible, even for those who seem beyond saving, that the story is not over until we decide it is over, and that the ending is ours to write. My name is Eleanor Whitmore Ashford. I was born a merchant's daughter, raised an heiress, humbled a servant, and transformed into a duchess. I have known loss and love, betrayal and forgiveness, despair and hope. And if my story proves anything, it is this. We are never truly defeated until we stop fighting. We are never truly lost until we stop searching. And we are never truly alone, even in our darkest moments, if we have the courage to open our hearts to the possibility of light. The wine stains faded from my dress long ago, but the memory remains, a reminder of where I came from and how far I have traveled. And when I look at Sebastian, my husband, my partner, my love, I know that every step of that journey was worth it. For in the end, the greatest revenge is not destruction, it is happiness. And I am, at last, truly happy. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me return to those crucial weeks following the revelation, for there is much I have not yet told. The morning after I revealed my identity, I woke in the guest chambers Sebastian had arranged for me, and for a long moment I did not know where I was. The bed was soft, the sheets were fine linen, the room was filled with pale winter light. It was so different from the narrow cot in the servants' quarters that I had occupied for months that I felt disoriented, as though I had awakened in a dream. Then the memories came flooding back. The ball, the wine, the laughter, the document in my hand, the silence that followed. I rose and went to the window. The grounds of Ashford Manor stretched before me, white with frost, beautiful and terrible in their cold perfection. I pressed my palm against the glass and felt the chill seep into my skin. "What have I done?" I whispered. I had revealed my hand. I had challenged the most powerful family in the county. I had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and there was no going back. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a maid, a young woman I did not recognize, carrying a tray of breakfast and a stack of clothing. "Lord Sebastian asked me to bring these," she said, her eyes wide with curiosity. "He said you would need something appropriate to wear." I looked at the clothing. There were several gowns in fine fabrics, along with undergarments, stockings, and a beautiful cashmere shawl. They were not new, but they were of excellent quality, far superior to anything I had worn in years. "These belonged to the Duchess's sister," the maid explained. "She passed away some years ago, and her things have been in storage. Lord Sebastian thought they might fit you." I thanked her, and she departed, leaving me alone with my breakfast and my borrowed finery. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind racing with questions and fears. What was Sebastian's game? Why was he treating me with such consideration after the humiliation his family had inflicted upon me? Was this a strategy to manipulate me, to soften my resolve, to trick me into abandoning my claim? Or was it something else entirely? I dressed carefully, selecting a gown of deep blue wool that complemented my coloring and fit reasonably well. The shawl was luxuriously warm, and I wrapped it around my shoulders like armor. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a stranger. Not the servant I had been, not the heiress I had once been, something in between, something new. That afternoon, Sebastian came to escort me on a tour of the house. It was a curious gesture, treating me as an honored guest when I had been scrubbing floors only days before. But I accepted, curious to see how he would behave when we were alone. He was different than I expected. Gone was the arrogant sneer, the casual cruelty, the assumption of superiority. In its place was something almost like humility. He showed me the library, the music room, the conservatory, speaking about each space with genuine affection. He told me stories about his childhood, about the games he had played, the mischief he had caused, the lessons he had learned. I listened, saying little, watching him carefully. I was looking for signs of deception, for evidence that this newfound warmth was merely a performance designed to win my trust. But I found none. Either he was the most skilled actor I had ever encountered, or he was genuinely trying to connect with me. In the conservatory, surrounded by exotic plants and the humid warmth of the glass-enclosed space, he stopped and turned to face me. "I have been thinking about what you said," he told me. "About your father, about what my family did to him." I waited, saying nothing. "I did not know," he continued. "I was 19 when it happened. I knew my father had been involved in some business venture that had gone wrong, but I did not know the details. I did not know about the promissory note, or the betrayal, or the ruin that followed." "Does it matter?" I asked. "Whether you knew or not, the result was the same. My father died broken and disgraced. I lost everything. It matters to me," Sebastian said. "I cannot change what happened. I cannot undo the wrong that was done to your family. But I can choose what kind of man I will be going forward. And I choose not to be the man who laughs at another's suffering. I choose not to be the man who pours wine on a woman's head because he can." I studied his face, searching for sincerity. I found it there, in the set of his jaw, in the intensity of his gaze. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you care what I think of you?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a small, rueful smile that transformed his features. "I am not certain," he admitted. "I only know that when I saw you standing there in the ballroom, wine dripping from your hair, your chin raised in defiance, I felt something I had never felt before. Shame. True shame. For what I had done. For who I had been. And with the shame came something else. A desire to be better. To be worthy of the look in your eyes." I did not know how to respond. His words were unexpected, disarming. I felt the walls I had built around my heart trembling, and I was not sure whether to reinforce them or let them fall. In the days that followed, Sebastian continued his campaign of kindness. He arranged for me to have access to the library, knowing my love of books. He invited me to dine with the family, though the Duchess made her displeasure clear with every icy glance. He took me riding on the estate, showing me the tenant farms and the wild forests beyond the manicured grounds. I began to see a different side of him. Beneath the arrogance and entitlement, there was intelligence and curiosity. Beneath the cruelty, there was a capacity for compassion that had been buried by years of conditioning. He had been raised to believe that his birth made him better than others, that servants and tradespeople were lesser beings, that kindness was weakness. But those beliefs were not truly his own. They had been imposed upon him by his parents, by society, by the weight of centuries of tradition. And now, for the first time, he was questioning them. I remember a conversation we had one evening in the library. The fire was burning low, the candles casting flickering shadows on the walls, and we were seated in armchairs facing each other, a chessboard between us. "Tell me about your mother," Sebastian said suddenly. I looked up from the board, surprised by the question. "She died when I was young," I said. "I barely remember her." "But you remember something," he pressed gently. "Tell me." I was silent for a moment, allowing the memories to surface. They came in fragments, incomplete and bittersweet. "She had red hair," I said at last, "like autumn leaves, and she smelled of lavender. She used to sing to me at night, old ballads about love and loss. I do not remember the words, but I remember the melody. It was the most beautiful sound in the world." Sebastian listened, his expression soft. "And when she died?" he asked. "I felt as though the sun had gone out," I said. "My father was devastated. He threw himself into his work, building his business, accumulating wealth. I think he believed that if he could just succeed enough, achieve enough, it would somehow make up for losing her. But it did not," Sebastian said. "No, it did not. Nothing could." We sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between us. "I never knew my grandfather," Sebastian said finally. "He died before I was born. But my father used to tell me stories about him. He was a kind man, apparently, generous and thoughtful. Not at all like my father." "What happened?" I asked. Sebastian shrugged. "Money, responsibility, the weight of expectation. My grandfather was the second son, free to be whatever he wanted. When his brother died and he inherited the title, everything changed. The pressure of maintaining the family's position, of living up to centuries of history, it hardened him. And he raised my father the same way." "And your father raised you," I said. "Yes." Sebastian's voice was quiet. "He taught me that emotion was weakness, that compassion was foolishness, that the only things that mattered were power and position." I believed him for a long time. I did not know any different. And now? Now I am beginning to wonder if everything I was taught was wrong. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, and I found myself moved by it. Here was a man who had been given every advantage, every privilege, every opportunity. And yet he had been deprived of the things that truly mattered: love, authenticity, the freedom to be himself. In that moment, I understood that Sebastian was as much a prisoner of his circumstances as I had been of mine. Our cages were different, but they were cages nonetheless, and perhaps together we could find a way to break free. The days turned into weeks, and the connection between Sebastian and me deepened. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. We debated philosophy and politics. We read poems aloud to each other. We laughed at ridiculous things and cried at beautiful ones. And slowly, gradually, I felt the ice around my heart beginning to thaw. But I was not naive. I knew that whatever was developing between us was complicated, fraught with danger. Sebastian was the heir to a dukedom, expected to marry a woman of his own class, to produce heirs, to continue the family line. I was a merchant's daughter, a former servant, a woman with a claim against his family that could destroy them all. The practical obstacles were enormous. Society would never accept me. The Duchess would never accept me. The scandal of our association, if it became known, would taint us both beyond redemption. And yet, despite all of this, I could not deny what I felt. When Sebastian entered a room, my heart beat faster. When he smiled at me, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. When his hand accidentally brushed against mine, I felt an electric shock that left me breathless. I was falling in love with him, against all reason, against all wisdom, against everything I had believed about myself and my capacity for forgiveness. And I could see in his eyes that he was falling in love with me too. The moment when everything changed came on a cold February afternoon. Sebastian and I had been walking in the gardens, wrapped in heavy cloaks against the chill, discussing a novel we had both been reading. The conversation was lively and engaging, and I was so absorbed in it that I did not notice the patch of ice beneath my feet. I slipped, my arms windmilling as I struggled to regain my balance. Sebastian caught me, his strong hands gripping my arms, pulling me close to steady me. For a moment, we stood there, our faces inches apart, our breath forming clouds in the frozen air. I looked into his eyes and saw everything. The desire he had been trying to hide, the longing he had been struggling to suppress, the love that had grown between us, unbidden and undeniable. "Eleanor," he whispered, and my name had never sounded so beautiful. "We cannot," I said, even as my heart screamed otherwise. "It is impossible." "Nothing is impossible," he replied. "Nothing except denying what I feel for you." And then he kissed me. It was not the kiss I had imagined in the rare moments when I allowed myself to imagine such things. It was not gentle or tentative or polite. It was fierce and desperate and hungry, the release of weeks of suppressed emotion, the culmination of a connection that had been building since the night of the ball. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him of all the reasons this could never work. I should have protected my heart, which had already been broken so many times. But I did not. I kissed him back, with equal ferocity, equal desperation, equal hunger. I kissed him as though my life depended on it, as though the world was ending, and this was our last chance to be together. When we finally parted, both of us breathless, I saw that there were tears in his eyes. "I love you," he said. "I know it is madness. I know it is impossible. But I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you since the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my dying breath." I should have said that I loved him too. I should have admitted what I had been feeling, what I had been fighting against for weeks. But fear held my tongue. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of losing myself in a love that could only end in disaster. "I need time," I said instead. "This is too much, too fast. I need time to think." Sebastian nodded, his face a mixture of hope and resignation. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I will wait for you, however long it takes." The days that followed were agony. I withdrew from Sebastian, avoiding the library, taking my meals in my room, refusing his invitations to walk or ride or talk. I needed to think, to weigh the risks and rewards, to decide what I truly wanted. On one hand, There was the life I had planned. Claim my father's debt, use the money to start again somewhere far from the Ashfords, build a new life for myself on my own terms. It was a safe path, a sensible path, a path that would protect my heart from further damage. On the other hand, there was Sebastian. The love that had grown between us against all odds. The possibility of a future I had never dared to imagine. The chance to transform the pain of my past into something beautiful and redemptive. The choice seemed obvious. Take the safe path. Protect yourself. Do not trust a man whose family had already betrayed you once. But my heart would not be silent. It reminded me of every conversation we had shared, every moment of connection, every glimpse I had caught of the man Sebastian was becoming. It reminded me that he had apologized, truly apologized, for what he had done at the ball. It reminded me that he had worked tirelessly to find a solution to the debt, to make things right without destroying his family. It reminded me that I had never felt for anyone what I felt for him. In the end, it was a dream that decided me. I dreamed of my father. He was standing in the garden of our old home in Bristol, surrounded by the roses my mother had planted. He was smiling, the way he used to smile before everything went wrong. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "My dear Eleanor." "Father?" I said. And in the dream, I was a child again, running to him with open arms. He caught me and held me close, and I breathed in the scent of him, tobacco and wool and something indefinably him. "I am so proud of you," he said, "so proud of the woman you have become." "I have not done anything," I protested. "I have survived, that is all." He pulled back and looked at me, his eyes kind and wise. "You have done so much more than survive," he said. "You have kept your heart open, despite everything. You have not let the pain turn you bitter or hard. That takes more courage than you know." "What should I do?" I asked. "About Sebastian, about everything." He smiled again, that gentle, loving smile that I had missed so desperately. "You already know what to do," he said. "You are just afraid to do it." "What if I am wrong?" I asked. "What if I trust him and he betrays me like you were betrayed?" "Then you will be hurt," my father said. "But you will survive, as you have survived before. And you will be glad that you took the chance, that you opened your heart, that you did not let fear dictate your choices." "I love him," I admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I love him, and it terrifies me." My father nodded. "Love is terrifying," he said. "It is the most terrifying thing in the world, but it is also the most wonderful. Do not let fear rob you of wonder, Eleanor. Do not let the past steal your future." I woke with tears streaming down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of clarity, of decision. I knew what I had to do. I found Sebastian in the library, sitting in his favorite chair, staring into the fire. He looked up when I entered, his face a mixture of hope and resignation. "I have made my decision," I said. He stood, his hands clenched at his sides, as though bracing himself for a blow. "I love you," I said. "I love you, and I am terrified. But I am more terrified of living without you than I am of loving you." The transformation of his face was extraordinary. The tension melted away, replaced by a joy so pure and radiant that it took my breath away. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took me in his arms, holding me as though I were the most precious thing in the world. "I will never betray you," he said. "I swear it on everything I hold sacred. I will spend the rest of my life making you happy, if you will let me." I believed him. Against all reason, against all experience, I believed him. And that belief, that leap of faith, changed everything. Let me tell you about the obstacles we faced, for they were many and formidable. The Duchess was the first and most implacable. When Sebastian informed his parents that he intended to marry me, she flew into a rage the likes of which I had never witnessed. She called me every name imaginable, accused me of scheming and manipulation, threatened to disown Sebastian if he went through with what she called his catastrophic folly. I stood in the doorway of the drawing room and listened to her tirade, my face carefully composed, my heart pounding. I had expected resistance, but the venom in her voice was shocking. To her, I was not merely unsuitable. I was an abomination, a stain on everything the Ashford name represented. Sebastian stood his ground. He told his mother that he loved me, that he intended to marry me, and that nothing she said or did would change his mind. He reminded her that he was of age, that the decision was his to make, and that if she could not accept his choice, he would accept her rejection. The Duchess fell silent, her face white with fury. Then she turned and swept out of the room, her skirts rustling like angry whispers. The Duke was more measured in his response. He called Sebastian into his study the following day and spoke with him for hours. I waited in my room, pacing, imagining every possible outcome. When Sebastian finally came to me, his face was tired but hopeful. "My father is a practical man," he said. "He does not approve of you, but he recognizes that your claim against the family gives you leverage. He would rather have you as a daughter-in-law than as an enemy." "So he consents?" I asked. "He consents on conditions." Sebastian took my hands in his. "He wants assurances that the debt will be forgiven, that you will not pursue any further claims, and that you will conduct yourself with the dignity expected of a future duchess." I bristled at the implication that I might not know how to conduct myself with dignity, but I swallowed my pride and nodded. "I will agree to his conditions," I said, "as long as he agrees to mine." "Your conditions?" Sebastian looked surprised. "I want the debt acknowledged," I said, "publicly. I want the Duke to admit that he wronged my father, that the promissory note was valid, and that the debt was justly owed. I do not need the money, but I need the truth to be spoken." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I will see what I can do," he said. The negotiation that followed was delicate and complex. The Duke was reluctant to admit any wrongdoing, fearing the damage to his reputation. But Sebastian pressed him, and eventually he agreed to a compromise. He would issue a private statement, witnessed by his solicitors, acknowledging the debt and expressing regret for the circumstances that had led to my father's ruin. The statement would be sealed and held by Sebastian's solicitor, available if I ever needed it, but not made public unless I chose to release it. It was not everything I wanted, but it was enough. My father's name would be cleared, at least in the eyes of those who mattered. The wrong that had been done to him would be acknowledged, if not punished. I signed the documents forgiving the debt. The Duke signed the statement of acknowledgement. And just like that, the business between our families was concluded. But the business between Sebastian and me was only beginning. The wedding was set for April. It would be a small ceremony, as I had wished, attended only by close family and a few trusted friends. The Duchess refused to participate in the planning, leaving the details to me and to Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, who had warmed to me considerably since my elevation from servant to betrothed. I spent the weeks before the wedding in a whirlwind of activity. There were gowns to be fitted, invitations to be sent, arrangements to be made. I had never organized such an event before, and I found myself grateful for Mrs. Blackwood's expertise and guidance. In the quiet moments, usually late at night, I would sit by the fire in my room and think about everything that had happened. The journey from merchant's daughter to future duchess seemed impossibly strange, like something out of a fairy tale. And yet, it was real. It was happening. In a matter of weeks, I would be Sebastian's wife. The thought filled me with a mixture of joy and terror. Joy because I loved him, truly and completely, in a way I had never loved anyone before. Terror because I knew that our path would not be easy. Society would not accept me readily. There would be whispers and snubs, cold shoulders and cutting remarks. I would have to prove myself over and over again, worthy of the position I would hold. But I was not afraid of hard work. I had been working hard all my life, and I had something that many duchesses never possessed: the knowledge of what it meant to struggle, to suffer, to rise from the ashes of destruction. I would bring that knowledge to my new role, and I would use it to make a difference. The night before the wedding, Sebastian came to me in the garden. The moon was full, casting silver light over the roses and the paths and the fountain. We walked together in silence for a long while, our hands entwined, our hearts beating in unison. "Are you ready?" he asked finally. I looked up at him, at this man who had transformed from my enemy into my beloved, and I smiled. "I have been ready my whole life," I said. "I just did not know what I was waiting for." He laughed, that warm, genuine laugh that I had come to love, and pulled me into his arms. "I do not deserve you," he said. "Perhaps not," I replied, smiling against his chest. "But you have me anyway." We stood there for a long time, holding each other, watching the moon rise higher in the sky. And I knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The wedding was everything I had hoped for, and more. The chapel was filled with spring flowers, their scent sweet and intoxicating. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbows on the stone floor. Sebastian stood at the altar, looking more handsome than I had ever seen him, his eyes shining with love and pride. As I walked down the aisle, my hand resting on the arm of a family friend who had agreed to give me away, I thought about my father. I wished he could be there, could see me in my white gown, could watch me marry a man who loved me. I imagined him smiling down from wherever he was, pleased that his daughter had found happiness at last. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. We spoke our vows with clear, strong voices, our eyes never leaving each other. When Sebastian slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a warmth spread through my body, a sense of rightness and completion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar said. Sebastian kissed me, and the small gathered crowd erupted in applause. Even the Duchess, who had come reluctantly at the Duke's insistence, managed a thin smile. We were married. Against all odds, against all expectations, we were married. The celebration that followed was modest, but joyful. There was music and dancing, laughter and champagne. Sebastian and I moved through the festivities in a haze of happiness, accepting congratulations, stealing kisses when we thought no one was looking. As evening fell, we retired to our chambers. I will not speak of what passed between us that night, for some things are too sacred, too private, to share. But I will say that it was everything I had dreamed of and more. We came together as husband and wife, two souls merging into one, and I knew in that moment that I had made the right choice. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The first year of our marriage was a time of adjustment and discovery. I learned the rhythms of life as a duchess, the expectations and responsibilities that came with the title. There were tenants to visit, charities to support, social obligations to fulfill. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Sebastian was my constant companion and guide. He introduced me to the people I needed to know, coached me on the subtleties of aristocratic etiquette, and defended me fiercely against any who dared to slight me. We were a team, united in purpose and love. The Duchess remained cold, but she gradually came to accept the reality of our marriage. She could not approve of me, but she could not ignore me either. I was the future of the Ashford line, the woman who would bear the heirs that would carry the family name into the next generation. That future came sooner than we expected. Within a year of our wedding, I discovered that I was with child. The joy I felt was indescribable, a deep, primal happiness that seemed to fill every corner of my being. Sebastian was overjoyed as well, and even the Duchess seemed to thaw slightly at the prospect of a grandchild. But the pregnancy was difficult. I was sick constantly, unable to keep food down, growing weaker by the day. The doctor was concerned, recommending bed rest and careful monitoring. Sebastian hardly left my side, his face drawn with worry, his hands gentle as he tended to me. There were moments when I feared the worst, moments when the pain was so intense, the exhaustion so overwhelming that I wondered if I would survive. But I held on, for Sebastian, for our unborn child, for the future we had fought so hard to create. And in the end, my body found its strength. The sickness passed. The child grew strong within me, and on a bright September morning, I gave birth to a son. We named him Charles, after my father. He had his father's dark hair and his grandmother's eyes, but his smile, Sebastian said, was all mine. I held him in my arms and wept with joy, marveling at the miracle of his existence. This, I thought, is what it was all for. This is why I survived, why I fought, why I refused to give up. For this moment, for this child, for this life. The years that followed were full of blessings. Charles grew into a bright, curious boy, full of questions and adventures. Sebastian was a devoted father, spending hours with his son, teaching him to ride, to read, to see the world with wonder and compassion. We had more children as the years passed, each one a gift, each one a reminder of the love that had brought us together. Our home was filled with laughter and noise, with muddy boots and scattered toys, with all the beautiful chaos of family life. I never forgot where I had come from. Even as I settled into my role as Duchess, even as I grew comfortable with the privileges and responsibilities of my position, I remembered the servant I had been. I remembered the humiliation, the hunger, the bone-deep weariness of endless work, and I vowed that I would never look down on those who served in great houses, never treat them as less than human. The staff at Ashford Manor came to respect me, I think. I was fair and kind, always ready with a word of encouragement or a helping hand. I knew their names, their families, their troubles, and their joys. I was not the cold, distant lady of the house that they had expected. I was something different, something better, I hoped. The Whitmore Foundation became my passion. As my children grew and needed me less, I devoted more and more time to its work. I traveled to the schools we supported, met with the young women whose lives we were helping to transform. Their stories moved me, inspired me, reminded me of why the foundation mattered. One young woman in particular stands out in my memory. Her name was Mary, a factory worker's daughter with a gift for mathematics. She had been identified by one of our teachers as exceptionally talented, but her family could not afford to continue her education. The foundation paid for her schooling, and she went on to become one of the first women to study mathematics at Cambridge. When Mary graduated, she came to visit me at Ashford Manor. She stood in my drawing room, this brilliant young woman who had risen from poverty to academic distinction, and she thanked me for the opportunity I had given her. "It was not I who gave you the opportunity," I told her. "It was you who seized it. All I did was open a door. You walked through it on your own strength." She smiled, that radiant smile that lit up her whole face, and I saw in her everything the foundation was meant to be. A door, an opportunity, a chance for women who had been told they were nothing to discover that they were everything. That is the legacy I am most proud of. Not the title, not the estate, not the social standing, but the doors I have opened, the lives I have touched, the women I have helped to rise. Sebastian understood this, as he understood everything about me. He supported the foundation with his time and his money, accompanying me on my visits, meeting the young women whose lives we were changing. He saw what I saw, the potential in every person, regardless of birth or circumstance. "We are not so different," he said to me once, "you and I. We were both prisoners of our pasts, trapped by expectations we did not choose. And we both found freedom, in the end." Yes, I agreed. But you had to learn to see past the privileges of your birth. I had to learn to see past the pain of mine. That is a different kind of prison. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps," he said, But the freedom is the same. The choice to be more than what we were made. The choice to become what we were meant to be. I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," I said. "And I love you," he replied. "Always and forever. Always and forever." Those words have been our touchstone through all the years. Through the joys and the sorrows, the triumphs and the challenges, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. Always and forever. Many years have passed since that fateful winter ball, and as I sit now in the morning room of our country house, the light falling golden through the windows, I find myself reflecting on all that has changed. The Duke passed away 5 years after our wedding, his health failing rapidly in his final months. I will not pretend that I mourned him as a daughter might mourn a father, for he never offered me the affection or acceptance that would have warranted such grief. But I mourned what he could have been, the relationship we might have had if circumstances had been different. The Duchess lived on for several more years, her bitterness undimmed by time. She never forgave Sebastian for choosing me, and she made certain I knew it with every cold glance, every cutting remark, every deliberate exclusion from family gatherings. But in her final illness, something shifted. She called me to her bedside one afternoon, her face gray against the white pillows, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "I was wrong," she said, the words clearly costing her great effort. "About you, about everything." It was not quite an apology, not quite an acceptance, but it was something, and I chose to receive it as the gift it was. Sebastian inherited the title and the estate, becoming the Duke of Ashford in his own right. But he was a different kind of duke than his father had been. He opened the grounds to the tenants, reduced their rents, and invested in improvements that made their lives easier. He supported reforms in Parliament that expanded education and opportunity. He became known as a progressive voice among the aristocracy, a man who believed that privilege came with responsibility. I was proud of him. I am still proud of him. Together, we transformed Ashford Manor from a monument to cold tradition into a warm, welcoming home. We filled it with books and music and laughter. We hosted gatherings not for the purpose of social climbing, but for the genuine pleasure of good company. We surrounded ourselves with people who valued kindness over status, substance over appearance. The Whitmore Foundation grew beyond anything I had imagined. What began as a modest trust became a network of schools and scholarships, helping hundreds of young women access the education that had been so instrumental in my own life. I spent many hours visiting these schools, meeting the students, hearing their stories. Every time I saw a young woman from humble circumstances achieve something remarkable, I thought of my father and knew that his memory was being honored in the most meaningful way possible. There were sorrows, too. Life does not spare us pain simply because we have already suffered. But Sebastian and I faced each challenge together, our bond strengthened by adversity rather than weakened by it. I remember a night, perhaps 10 years into our marriage, when Sebastian found me crying in the garden. I had received news that an old friend from my days in service had passed away, a woman who had shown me kindness when kindness was rare. The grief was unexpected in its intensity, dredging up memories I had thought long buried. Sebastian sat beside me on the stone bench, his arm around my shoulders, and said nothing for a long while. He did not try to fix my pain or minimize my loss. He simply held me while I wept, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of my emotions. When my tears finally subsided, he pressed a kiss to my forehead and said, "The people we lose never truly leave us. They live on in the ways we have been changed by knowing them." It was such a simple thing to say, but it captured a truth I had been struggling to articulate. My father lived on in my determination to right the wrong that had been done to him. My friend lived on in the compassion I tried to show to others. Every person who had touched my life, for better or worse, had left their mark upon me. I was the sum of all those marks, a tapestry woven from countless threads of experience and relationship. And the pattern that emerged, imperfect and incomplete as it was beautiful in its own way. As I grew older, I began to write down my memories, not for publication, not for posterity, but simply as a way of making sense of my life. The act of putting words to paper helped me understand the shape of my journey, the themes that recurred, the lessons I had learned. I wrote about my childhood, about the love my parents had shared, and the warmth of our home before everything fell apart. I wrote about my father's optimism, his belief that hard work and honesty would always be rewarded, and the cruel way that belief was shattered. I wrote about the dark years, the humiliations I endured, the moments when I wanted to give up. I wrote about the stubborn spark within me that refused to be extinguished, the voice that whispered, "Keep going," even when everything seemed hopeless. I wrote about Ashford Manor, about the strange twist of fate that brought me to the house of my enemies as a servant. I wrote about the winter ball, the wine, the laughter, the moment when I stopped being invisible and became, for better or worse, someone who could not be ignored. I wrote about Sebastian, about my hatred for him, my confusion, my reluctant fascination, and finally, my love. About the way he changed, the way I changed, the way we changed each other, about the life we built together, brick by brick, day by day, from the ruins of our pasts. And I wrote about forgiveness. This, perhaps, was the hardest part to put into words. Forgiveness is not a single moment, not a decision made once and never revisited. It is a practice, a discipline, a choice made over and over again in the face of memory and pain. I had to forgive the Duke for destroying my father. I had to forgive the Duchess for her cruelty and contempt. I had to forgive Sebastian for the wine, the laughter, the casual assumption that I was less than human because of the circumstances of my birth. But most of all, I had to forgive myself. I had to forgive myself for the years I spent in bitterness and resentment, for the energy I wasted on hatred when I could have been building something beautiful, for the moments when I let my pain define me, when I became so focused on what had been taken that I could not see what remained. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean pretending that the wrongs I had suffered did not matter. It meant releasing the hold that those wrongs had on my heart, making space for something other than anger and grief. It meant choosing to live. I look back now at the young woman I was, standing in that ballroom with wine dripping down her face, and I hardly recognize her. She seems so distant, so foreign, like a character in a novel I read long ago. But she is me. She is the foundation upon which everything else was built. Without her suffering, I would not have found my strength. Without her humiliation, I would not have discovered my worth. Without her loss, I would not have learned what truly mattered. I would not wish her fate upon anyone. But I would not trade it either. Sebastian is older now, his dark hair streaked with silver, the lines of his face deepened by time and worry and laughter. But when he smiles at me across the breakfast table, I still see the young man who stood in my doorway that night, wild-eyed and desperate, choosing love over everything else. And when I catch sight of myself in the mirror, I see the accumulated weight of all my years, the marks of joy and sorrow written upon my features. I am not the girl I was. I am something more, something shaped by experience and refined by fire. We do not know how much time we have left. No one does. But we have made peace with that uncertainty, finding comfort in the knowledge that whatever comes, we will face it together. The other day, Sebastian asked me what I would say if I could speak to my younger self, the girl who had just lost everything and did not know how she would survive. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I would tell her that the worst is not the end, I said. I would tell her that she is stronger than she knows. I would tell her that love is waiting for her in the most unexpected place, and that the man who seems like her enemy will become her greatest ally. I would tell her that she will not only survive, she will flourish. And I would tell her that one day she will look back on this moment and understand that it was the beginning of everything. Sebastian took my hand and kissed it gently. "And what if she did not believe you?" he asked. "Then I would tell her to wait and see," I replied. "The proof is in the living, and so it is. The proof of everything I have learned, everything I have become, everything I have to offer the world, is in the life I have lived. I am Eleanor Whitmore Ashford. I have known the depths of despair and the heights of joy. I have been broken and remade, lost and found, alone and loved. And if my story means anything, it is this: there is no darkness so complete that light cannot penetrate it. There is no loss so devastating that hope cannot survive it. There is no pain so great that love cannot heal it. We are all of us works in progress, unfinished stories waiting for their next chapter. The endings have not yet been written. The possibilities are endless, and sometimes, just sometimes, the one who pours wine upon us turns out to be the one who will stand beside us for the rest of our lives. Fate has a strange sense of humor, but I am grateful for every twist and turn of my journey, for every tear and every triumph, for every moment that brought me to where I am today. Here, in this house filled with light and love, here, with this man who chose me when he could have chosen anyone. Here, at the end of one story and the beginning of another. This is where I belong. This is who I was always meant to be. And this, at last, is peace. The seasons have turned many times since the events I have recounted, and each turning has brought its own gifts and its own griefs. The garden outside my window, once formal and severe in the manner preferred by the old Duke, has been transformed into a riot of color and fragrance. Sebastian indulges my passion for roses, and together we have planted varieties from every corner of the world. I think often of the contrast between the garden as it was and the garden as it is. The old garden was all about control, about bending nature to human will, about presenting a perfect facade to the world. The new garden is wild, abundant, slightly chaotic. It is alive in a way the old garden never was. I have come to see it as a metaphor for everything that has changed. The aristocracy of my youth was like that old garden, rigid and controlled, obsessed with appearances, terrified of anything that deviated from the established order. Women like me, women who dared to claim what was owed to them, who refused to accept the place society had assigned them, were like weeds to be uprooted and discarded. But the world is changing. I can see it in the newspapers, in the conversations of our guests, in the faces of the young women who visit from the foundation. Old certainties are crumbling, old hierarchies are being questioned. The future belongs to those who are willing to plant new seeds, to nurture new growth, to embrace the wild abundance of possibility. I will not live to see that future in its fullness, but I have done what I can to help bring it about. And that is enough. Sebastian and I talk sometimes about what will happen after we are gone. He worries about the estate, about the tenants, about the responsibilities that have been in his family for generations. I worry about the foundation, about the young women who depend on it, about the continuation of the work that has given my life such meaning. But mostly, we talk about the things that matter more than property or legacy. We talk about the love we have shared, the adventures we have had, the quiet moments of connection that have sustained us through all the years. Those are the things that will endure, I believe, not in the monuments we build or the institutions we establish, but in the ripples of influence that spread outward from every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every choice to love rather than hate. I think of my father, who never lived to see his name cleared or his debt repaid. I think of the hopes he had for me, the dreams he nurtured, the sacrifices he made. He would be proud. I know, not of my title or my wealth, but of the woman I have become, of the way I have used my second chance. I think of my mother, who died when I was young, whose face I can barely remember, but whose presence I still feel in moments of doubt and difficulty. She is with me always, a guardian spirit, a source of strength. And I think of myself, the many selves I have been throughout my life, the happy child, the hopeful girl, the grieving daughter, the struggling servant, the defiant woman, the loving wife. They are all part of me, layers of experience and identity that have built upon each other to create the person I am today. We are not single static beings, I have learned. We are processes, constantly evolving, constantly becoming. The self I am today is not the self I was yesterday, and it is not the self I will be tomorrow. This is not something to fear, but something to celebrate. Every moment is an opportunity for growth, for change, for transformation. Even now, in the twilight of my life, I am still becoming, still learning, still open to the possibility of wonder. Last week, Sebastian and I walked together in the garden as the sun was setting. The light was golden, the air was sweet with the scent of roses, and for a moment, everything was perfect. He turned to me and said, "Do you remember the night of the winter ball?" I laughed. How could I forget? He smiled, that gentle smile that still makes my heart flutter after all these years. "I have thought about that night often," he said, "about what might have happened if I had not poured the wine, if you had not revealed your secret, if everything had unfolded differently." I considered his words carefully. "If you had not poured the wine," I said at last, "I would have continued as a servant in this house. I would have hidden my identity forever. I would never have claimed what was owed to my father. And we would never have found each other." He nodded slowly. "So in a strange way," he said, "the worst thing I ever did led to the best thing that ever happened to me." I took his hand in mine. "That is often how it works," I said. "The moments we think will destroy us turn out to be the moments that save us. The pain we try to avoid turns out to be the path to our greatest joy." He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "I love you, Eleanor," he said. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you walk into that ballroom, even though I did not know it then. And I will love you until my last breath." Tears pricked at my eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "And I love you," I replied, "despite everything, because of everything." We stood there together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The garden around us was alive with the sounds of evening, bird song and rustling leaves, and the distant murmur of water from the fountain. It was a moment of perfect peace, a moment I will carry with me always. This is the ending of my story, though of course it is not truly an ending. Life does not have neat conclusions, tidy resolutions that wrap everything up in a bow. Life is messy and complicated and ongoing, but if I must choose a place to stop, let it be here, in this garden, with this man, in this moment of perfect, fleeting beauty. I have told you of my trials and my triumphs. I have shared with you the darkest chapters of my life and the brightest. I have tried to capture something of the truth of my experience, imperfect and incomplete as that truth must inevitably be. What I hope you take from my story is not a template for your own life. Your path will be different from mine, shaped by your own unique circumstances and choices. What I hope you take instead is a sense of possibility, a belief that no matter how dark things seem, there is always the potential for light, a faith that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force in the universe. And perhaps, if nothing else, a reminder that the wine stains fade, the laughter dies, the humiliation passes, but we remain. Changed, perhaps, scarred, certainly, but still standing, still fighting, still hoping, still capable of love. My name is Eleanor Whitmore Ashford. This has been my story. And now, whatever your story may be, I wish you courage. I wish you strength. I wish you the resilience to survive whatever challenges lie ahead. And most of all, I wish you love. For in the end, that is all that matters. That is all that remains. Love. The word is simple, but the reality is vast. It encompasses everything I have learned, everything I have become, everything I have to give. May you find it. May you nurture it. May you share it freely. And may you never, ever forget that you are worthy of it. The candle on my writing desk is burning low now. The hour is late. Sebastian will be waiting for me, wondering what has kept me so long at my papers. I set down my pen. I close my journal. I rise from my chair and cross to the window one last time. The garden is dark, but I can see the shapes of the roses, the outlines of the paths, the silhouette of the fountain against the starlit sky. It is beautiful in its darkness, full of mystery and promise. Tomorrow the sun will rise again, the flowers will bloom, life will continue, and I will be there to greet it, with gratitude, with wonder, with love. Always, always, with love.